I want to talk to you about a research project that, quite frankly, has been several years in the making. And here's how it all started. I'm sure many of you have had the same experience I've had. When you're elsewhere in the country or somewhere else in the world, and you're describing living in Minnesota, and especially describing that we have this amazing business community, you sometimes get a lot of puzzled looks from people. And I'm convinced this is what happens. When I talk about the number of corporate headquarters here, and people think of the corporate campuses in town, this is what they're thinking about. Then they're also a little bit confused because I'll talk about the infrastructure and that, and I'm convinced this is what they're thinking about. And then I'll go on and talk about leadership and the business leadership, how important it is both for our corporations and for the community at large. And I'm convinced that this is what they're thinking about, right? So generally, we start to engage in a discussion, and I talk about the region and the business community and the number of headquarters. And eventually, I don't think they picture this, but they're really intrigued by the concentration of businesses that we have. And what happens then is I get the question that I learned to hate. Why? What's happening up there? And I hated that because where companies locate when they expand had been a big part of my research. And I didn't really have an answer to this question. And it was the desire to try and get some traction on that that started to lead to this. And so the first thing I did was, let me just describe the place. And I won't spend a lot of time in the data, but as I put it together, when it comes to Fortune 500 headquarters in particular, just in raw counts, we have one of the highest counts of any metropolitan area in the country. And on the per capita basis, we are arguably the most headquartered place. But for those of us who live here and are part of the business community, we know it's not just Fortune 500s. There are big privately held companies. Those don't end up in the Fortune 500, so those don't even get represented. And then there's this whole class of headquarters that I've come to call the hidden headquarters. So if you think of somebody like Wells Fargo, you're not headquartered here, but many business units are. You have all the talent, all the impact on our community. There's a company that's headquartered here. So Wells Fargo, Thomson Reuters, of course, Medtronic drops out of the Fortune 500. So they're a hidden headquarters. They don't come on these. So we have this huge concentration. The data I do want to show you a little bit of that is I want to put this into a global perspective now. And so last year, compiled the Global 500. So these are the 500 biggest companies in the world. 6 of them are headquartered in the Twin Cities. To calibrate that, there are only 19 metropolitan areas in the world that have 6 or more Global 500s. And you can see on a per capita basis, we're in the top 10. At the same level pretty much that London is. And you can see no other North American city is really that close to us. So yes, we are a big headquarters town. The other thing that was interesting with these data, and I'm going to go back and talk about the Fortune 500 for a second. So the last Fortune 500, there were 18 Fortune 500 companies in the Twin Cities. The very first Fortune 500 was in 1955. In 1955, there were 9 Fortune 500s in the Twin Cities. So we've been a headquarters town for a long period of time. Here's the interesting thing. The movement from 9 to 18 wasn't simply by adding 9 companies. It was by adding 44 and losing 35. So what I'm telling you is in the last 60 years, there have been 53 different Fortune 500s headquartered in this town. Now, the fact that there's big turnover in the biggest companies in the country, that's not that unusual. So there's turnover everywhere. What is actually unique about our region, of those 44 that were added, only 1 is a headquarters move. All the others are Minnesota companies or located in Minnesota at that time that grew into the Fortune 500. You can't say that in Atlanta, and you can't say that in Phoenix. Oh, and by the way, these hidden headquarters, so most of the losses are not companies shutting down or moving out of town, although there are some exceptions. A lot of times they're companies that are acquired. And a lot of these hidden headquarters in town, so if we think about Thomson Reuters, that's the old West Publishing. We think about Boston Scientific's operations in town. Initially that was CPI, cardiac pacemakers, and SciMed, right? So not only has these companies haven't disappeared, but in many of these cases, these companies are much bigger, these operations in town, than they were when they were acquired. So the acquirers kept the company here and it's growing. So I just want to paint the picture that if you think this is a headquarters town, my general sense as I've been talking to audiences in town over the last number of years, you have underestimated how intense a headquarters center we are. We are a big headquarters economy. Why here? Oh, I see a couple puzzled faces. If you live in the western suburbs, the picture on the bottom is St. Paul. So why here? And this is why I used to hate the question is we have lots of explanations why you get concentrations of business in certain regions. My concern was they actually didn't hold here. So when I would tell my friends at different places around the world about this, their first question would be, okay, what's the big industry cluster that drives everything, right? So if I say the word Silicon Valley, you all think of tech. There's a disproportionate number of tech firms. If I talk about Detroit, you think about autos. Our economy is amazingly diverse. Those 18 different Fortune 500s are arguably in 17 or 18 different industries, right? So it's not one, now it's not to say that we don't have industry clusters around, right? Med devices are huge, agribusiness is huge, but it's not one industry that drives our economy. It's just the opposite. We're really big and diversified. The other thing too is we're bucking the trend of general demographics. In the last 60 years in the United States, population and business activity have moved south and they've moved west. We're neither. And in fact, all the Midwestern states and the major Midwestern metropolitan areas have all seen their Fortune 500s in net disappear. We've had just the opposite experience. Then when I'm talking about this in different places around the country or different places around the world, I get interrupted at this point and they say, why are you boring us? Because we know it's obvious. You guys have super low taxes. Okay, that's my reaction also. So it's not that, or then they'll say, well, no, what you do is you tax everybody and then you go spend that money and buy headquarters. But if you look at the data, we don't spend money on business incentives, much less so for the size of our economy than many places. And as I told you before, that's evident in that we aren't buying them to show up. We grow those companies internally. So I'm running out of explanations. And I'm getting a little bit frustrated because I'd spent a lot of time, and this is a couple years in, and my wife's giving me a hard time are you ever going to get to resolution on this? And I'm like, I'm still working, although she did admit I was a lot more fun at dinner parties because the trivia I knew about this place was quite good. But then I'd ask people in town, why is this? Number one answer, it's cold, so we work really hard. Well, I grew up in Alberta, so don't even try that one on me. Because if it's about crappy weather, Alberta has us trumped. Or we're hardworking Scandinavians, or something like that. So again, we have these folk theories, but none of them really rang true. And it was one day, sort of putting this together, a couple different things hit me. First of all, if we want to talk about headquarters, any story is going to have to be about human capital, right? It's not the corporate campus, it's not the desks, it's not the computers, it's people who work there. And you know what? There's one type of human capital that's in every headquarters: professional management. Some will have R&D labs, some will have manufacturing. Can't have a headquarters without professional management. And that started to make sense about some of the other things I told you about. Companies don't grow themselves. They have to be managed to grow. And the growth and rejuvenation was such a big thing. Okay, that started to make sense. And it also started to make sense of other things that I'd seen in town moving here that are different from other places I lived and other business communities. And that's the extent to which people, they move jobs, everybody moves jobs, but to what extent they will stay in town and jump between different industries. So when I put all these together, it's like, you know what? We have an explanation here an explanation for what's driving our economy and that people haven't talked about when it comes to economic development in general. And so let me highlight what it is. There's 3 pillars to it. The first is managers. As I said, companies don't manage themselves, companies don't grow themselves, and the story about Minnesota is growing and reinventing companies. So we have a deep pool of this workforce. We've had it for a long period of time. This has been a headquarters economy for a long period of time. It's rather unique, and if you look at some of the demographics of the region, it's educated, it's high earning. That's a reflection of this is the talent pool that is disproportionately represented in this town. And then, as I said, what was really striking, and especially as I began to dig into this more, this workforce moves from company to company as you change jobs, but often across industries. And what that will mean is people will often take management practices or expertise that they've got in one industry and port it into the other. And one of my favorite examples here, I go into much more depth in the book, is if you think back to Medtronic and its explosive growth rate came under the management of Win Wallen. Win Wallen, of course, a grad of the University of Minnesota, came to them from Pillsbury, where he was COO. And so I can tell story after story about individuals who move from company to company. So we have these sharing of practices, but it's not only just the sharing of expertise. Like I say, often they'll take expertise in one region or one industry and bring it to another. So we have this cross-pollinating effect. So all of our businesses end up better as they move from them. And again, this is important to help companies grow, because what happens is this talent doesn't just stay in Fortune 500 headquarters. They'll step down to mid-sized firms, right? Company moves to about $1 billion. They need different expertise than they had when they were a $100 million company. They'll move to startups. Even in medtech, you need more than patents or an idea to make a med device firm grow. You have to market it, you have to manage the financing, you have to move it through regulation. All of this is management. So we have a reason. It's not by accident that we're growing and reinventing these companies. It's because of this talent pool. But there's a part of this, and I thought this was great, that was a little bit uncomfortable. Because we're not the only region in the country that has lots of headquarters. Why does this not appear to be happening elsewhere? And that's where it came back to the phrase that I would hear from every executive recruiter that I talked to about this issue. It's really hard to get people to move to Minneapolis, but it's about impossible to get them to leave. And if you stop and think about it, that fact that people don't leave is actually going to accelerate this movement across companies. Because here's how it works, right? We have this big pool of managerial talent. And at the U, we will graduate lots of talent every year, but we can't fill all the empty positions, nor would it make sense for our companies to only look to the U for their talent. So we bring people into the Twin Cities as they hire them. Now, people don't leave. And if you stop and think about that, what that means, if you're looking for a new opportunity or a position dries up or there's a political power play and you're looking to change companies, well, we're really diverse. It's going to be somewhat hard to land another job in your industry in the Twin Cities. So if you don't want to leave, it means you are switching industries and you're staying in town. And that's what accelerates it. Why don't people want to leave? That's where quality of life comes in. We'd like to, brag about, and we're really proud of the quality of life of living in the Twin Cities. That's what keeps people from leaving. It's economic opportunities that bring them. And why I say that is, there's a line of reasoning out there that if you build it, they will come arguments that I don't think hold here. So there's arguments out there, you build a great place to live, everybody's going to show up, you're going to have a wonderful economy. No. Quality of life retains people. Job opportunities, especially professional management, that's what attracts them. So I was feeling pretty good. I think we have an explanation, it makes sense. I was able to sit down with a group of very senior HR executives across some of the biggest companies in town. And the comment was, I don't want to hear that I'm wrong, but if I'm wrong, you have to tell me. And as we went through the evening, they just told me story after story why this was right. So to have it validated that way made sense, but I am an academic. That's not far enough. There's some important things in this argument I wanted to see if I could really show as happening. So the first is there really a unique way in which talent moves in and out of this region? And do we look different than the other metropolitan areas in this country? We do. Let me show you how. So I'm focusing on migration patterns of employed, high-earning college degree holders. Why them? That's a description of the demographics of what professional management is like, right? We pay them well, they tend to have college degrees, and they're working. If I focus on this demographic, now I have a little graph there. The vertical axis is net migration. So the higher you are in net, the more people you're bringing. If you're below the line there, it means you're losing. On the horizontal axis, that's outward migration. So if you're on the very far left, it means you really retain talent. If you're far on the right, it means you're churning your talent. Let me show you where Minneapolis-St. Paul ends up. Way on the left. And we are building this talent base. Now, this is going to be an eye chart, so I don't want you to look at particular cities, but I just want you to show you where the other 25 major metros in the country are. And I want you to pay attention to the one on the very far right. There's Phoenix. So what I'm showing you is that if you think, and Phoenix likes to brag, it's not just retirees that are moving here. We have lots of young professionals or professionals moving in town. That's fine. They're leaving Phoenix at a rate that's over double the rate at which talented professionals leave Minneapolis. And in net, we are building this talent base faster than Phoenix is. You know what's interesting about this? I can show this in 40 years of data. Minneapolis ends up that people don't leave, and we're building our talent base. The other interesting thing, too, this is pronounced for educated, high-earning individuals. We don't see it in the population as a whole. We have been extremely beneficial and extremely good at building an educated, high-earning workforce. And that's why this economy is growing at rates that our neighboring states don't see. So I felt really good. Key element is how people move in and out of here is very different, and I can show that in the best migration data that we have. So that really helped me solidify what is happening. There was still this issue as to why. And to get to that, I turned to the business community. Because to get to some of the things I've been telling you, I'd actually have to understand how individuals moved in and out of here and how they switched jobs. And so I surveyed professional managers in 23 companies in town. 23 companies gave me access to their professional headquarters employees. And I should say this right now, maybe some of you in this room took this survey, thank you. The other thing I'll say is the business community has been absolutely fantastic in aiding this work and their concern and care for our local economy. And so this is why they've participated. So you get a sense of who's there. I'm going to show you data on about 3,000 people. And the response rate on a survey like this is amazing. So these are amazing data. I will brag. That's un-Minnesotan, I understand. But that's how it's going to be. Okay, so there's a few things I want to show you. I want to show you some of the data from the survey that will both support the claims that I made of what's happening, but I also want to show a few surprises that I found in the data, and that when I've talked about, I think people aren't well calibrated what's happening here. So just a few demographics. Highly educated, yes, over 90% have college degrees, over 40% have graduate degrees. They're high earning. Over 40% are in households that earn about 3.5 or 4 times the median household income in the United States. 85% are married, and half of them are raising children. Surprise number 1. I'm not a native to the Twin Cities. Maybe you aren't. Does it just seem like everybody who's here and works here has always been here and everything else? Yeah, so I wanted to see, how are we doing for Minneapolis or Twin Cities lifers? So what proportion of this workforce was raised in the Twin Cities, did all their college and grad school in the Twin Cities, and have only spent their professional career in the Twin Cities? That's only 15% of the workforce. It's a myth to think that it's only people from the Twin Cities who have stayed there. If I broaden this to Minnesota as a whole, maybe about 35, maybe at the most 40. No, our professional headquarters workforce is not just so closed in geographically. Surprise number 2, dual careers. I asked them, if they were married, does their spouse have career obligations and aspirations? Look, this is more intense than saying, does your spouse earn money, right? You're saying, do they have a career? Look, these are high-earning individuals in corporate headquarters. There's lots of reasons why couples focus on one career. Not here. That's about 70% of the workforce. And I want to show some additional data, and I see my colleague Colleen is here. So these are data that Colleen put together that we're talking about. What we did is we wanted to see, do we look different than the other metros in the United States? So if we focus on married couples, both of who report income, right? So that's not as strenuous as dual careers. That's 87% of the married couples in Minneapolis-St. Paul. That is the highest dual income earning of the 30 major metros in the country. You know what's even more interesting? It is the most equal among those two in the household. So this is not an issue of just one earner and somebody earning a few bucks to go on vacation. These are really dual careers, and we look different from the rest of the country that way. Now, a little bit back to my story. So, if I survey enough people, I ask them, your previous position, was it in a different company, different industry, or different metro area? Yeah, people switch companies about a third of the time. Look at those last two. 18% is 50% more than 12%. 50% more likely to be switching industries than switching metro areas. People in town switch metro areas. Oh, and the nice thing about surveying people, I could start to give them hypothetical job opportunities and see how they would react to them. So, first I asked, would you be willing to accept an internal transfer, because you're working at headquarters, to another metropolitan area? 31% say that they'd be likely or very likely. Is that big? Is that small? I don't know, because I'm not comparing it, but let's compare it to the other opportunities. Second opportunity, here's the scenario they're presented. You get a call from an executive recruiter who's giving you, again, a career advancing opportunity in your industry, but you have to move to another metro area to work for this company. Much less likely to move to a different metro area than to take an internal transfer. Third one is you get a call from an executive recruiter. They have an opportunity within the Twin Cities, but it's in a different industry from where you work. And even though it draws on your skills, and that's why they're looking for you, you're going to have to spend some time coming up to speed. Yeah, people are really willing to do that. Oh, and here's the fun one. Last scenario, you get a call from a former colleague. They are working in a company with 20 people. It really is a startup. And remember, these people that I'm surveying are working in big corporate headquarters. How likely are you to consider that? They are considering that at the same rate as an internal transfer in their company, and much more so than moving out of the region. That is what is happening here, folks. We're holding on to people, and they're jumping between industries, and they're willing to accept that, and they're willing to step down out of the big corporate headquarters into smaller firms or startups. I asked them, did you spend part of your working career living and working in a different metro? It's over 40%. And when you ask them if you lived and worked elsewhere, then I just asked them, this open-ended question, why'd you move here? Over 2/3 of the responses, it is, I moved for my job or my spouse's job. What attracts talent? Career opportunities. Then I asked them, is there a different metro area that you would prefer to live? And if that's the case, well then why don't you move there? 28% say they'd rather live elsewhere. Here's what's really interesting. Quality of life starts playing as big, and when I combine all the quality of life reasons that they give me why they don't move, it plays a bigger role than job opportunities. Quality of life retains talent. It doesn't attract it. Well, what quality of life dimensions matter? So I give them this scenario where you are being transferred or potentially being transferred to another metropolitan area. Here are 19 quality of life factors. How important are they? They're all good things. So nice weather, good job opportunities, low taxes, pro sports teams. My concern was nobody's paying attention. Everything's good, so they just fill in everything. There's amazing variation in what they answer. Here's what they value. Most important, jobs and raising a family. Outdoors and healthcare factor in there, but jobs and raising a family. What are the least important? Again, these are not bad things. I'm not saying they care about them. Least important, religious communities, sports teams, tax rates, and cultural events. And again, if you think about this demographic, they've invested in their careers, that's important, that's what they care about. That and raising families. This notion of raising families, and you can see the importance of quality public schools. Let me show you this. Here's my surprise number 3. So I asked them, so like I say, half of them are currently raising school-age children. Do you send your children to public schools, private schools, or homeschool? Now remember, I told you the demographics and earnings of what this is. So 40% are earning in households earning over $200,000 a year. Here's the answer. And I will tell you this without joke. When I have talked about this on the East Coast, I have literally had someone fall out of their chair. Oh, and by the way, this is pretty much income invariant. So the highest income, that will drop to 82%, and the other income levels, it's about 87%. And I want you to stop and think about it, what this means for talent retention in the region. Because I firmly believe anywhere you live in the United States, you can send your children to quality schools. In some locations, though, that only choice to do that is to send them to private schools. Now, if you stop and think, if right now you're sending children to public schools and this is working well, and you're being enticed to move to a region where you have to send them to public school or to private schools, and let's say, what, $25,000 a year, and you have 2 children, and same thing on the East Coast, when I say $25,000 a year, they're like, I don't know where you're sending your kids for $25,000 a year. But the math is easy, so $50,000 a year after tax is what you have to earn to be in the same place just to send your children to school. There is a huge economic incentive that good public schools make. And part of the reason I say this, I was talking to a former legislator, and he said, are you telling me that investment in K-12 is more than just the workforce in 20 years? It's about today's workforce? I'm like, absolutely. It's like, oh, that changes the conversation. I think it should change the conversation. Okay, I want to wrap things up because I just wanted to paint a picture. But let me say a few things in concluding. First, the Twin Cities headquarters story is one of reinventing, creating, and growing companies. And one of the things I want to highlight here, when I was doing this, I ended up talking to Dave Beal, who used to work for the Pioneer Press. And he directed me to this 1936 Fortune magazine article about the Twin Cities. And the article was basically, St. Paul's dead, Minneapolis is about to follow it, and the reason is, we chopped down all the trees. If we were just servicing the hinterland, the economy was done and we were just fighting over it. And I say this because it was clear about 100 years ago, if this region only drew on its natural resources, the gig was up. Oh, and by the way, when they say that St. Paul was economically obsolete, I will admit they had a little footnote there that there was this manufacturing company, something Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, that might become something. So, right? But I bring this up because if it really was just our position in servicing the expanding West, the story would have been over about 100 years ago. But it's not. And the reason is we've been a location that has grown companies, expanded our economy, and I don't think you can talk about growing an economy unless you talk about the skilled individuals who invest in and grow those companies. And that's the managerial workforce. And what's unique about our region is we have a very deep pool here, how it moves from company to company, and how it moves in and out of this region. And I'll end up with, and if you like the story, the book will be released in November. Thank you.